This is such a critical question. And I would say by reading this question, there's a lot of things I already know. I'm kind of reading between the lines.
This is the PMP Industry Insider Podcast.
Hello, everyone. Welcome out to another episode of the PMP Industry Insider Podcast. We take a look at what is changing in the pest and lawn industries, and we take you to the front lines to those that are driving those changes. As always, I'm Donnie Shelton, owner of Triangle Home Services, which has Triangle Pest as well as Triangle Lawn. And with me is a man who needs no introduction at all, Mr. Dan Gordon. Dan, would you like to say good afternoon, introduce yourself, our sponsors, a little bit about our peer groups, and then our topic and our amazing, amazing guests?
I need no introduction.
Oh, man, it needs no introduction. That's true.
Hello, everybody. Dan Gordon, PCO Bookkeepers, M&A Specialists. We focus on accounting for the pest management and lawn care industry, as well as exit planning services. And if you're interested in marketing for the pest or lawn industry, please visit our sponsor, Coalmarch by WorkWave. That's coalmarch.com. And for those of you looking to purchase insurance from an industry-specific group, that would be pestsure.com. And if you are here's the peer groups is an interesting one. We've been doing this for quite a while. Donnie and I have been doing peer groups since before we started the podcast, and we've got several groups going. They're just a wealth of information, and if you've never been a participant in a peer group, you should. You can listen to episode 136 where you can hear more about it. You could go to pmpindustryinsider.com/peer groups, and you can hear more about it. Or you can talk to our facilitator, David Billingsley, who can talk to you more about it. But I think it's highly worthwhile. And so let's see. Topic. Today, we're going to dig into our listener mailbag.
We need some intro for that, like mailbag. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe someone can come up with a good idea, but there needs to be some sort of.
I don't know if so. This is how old I am, but maybe did your kids watch something called Blue's Clues?
Oh my gosh! Yes.
The mailbox.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. How does that go again? I'm just kidding.
I forget, but I don't know. I think the kid who was like the star was arrested on drug charges and he's in jail now. So
that's what usually happens, right? I mean, the whole thing with Pee Wee Herman and like all those people who do, like, you know what I mean? Like that's somehow it just doesn't end well for them. But anyway, I digress. Let's move on.
Just gotta when you make it, just behave yourself. That's all.
That's true. Yeah.
All right.
Even if it's on a kid's show,
That's right. And there's nobody who behaves himself better than Donnie Shelton. So.
Oh, you know what? I didn't mention this, but check it out. I am wired up here.
What the heck?
Yeah, I'm all wired up. I had surgery on my knee on Thursday, so I am wired up and trying to get all better. And so, yeah, when
are you back on the running on the treadmill?
It's gonna be a while for that, but I'm starting to train. But it's gonna be a while probably like a couple months before I can do that back again. But
oh boy, I wish that would happen to me.
Yeah.
So I went out for a run this morning. I'm here in Florida with the hurricane that's about to come at us, and I went out and it was nice. And in between bands, and then about halfway into my run, it just
dumped.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
Anyway. Yeah.
Yeah.
So all right, let's go.
Okay.
Yes.
Should we start with the first? I mean, I'm happy to take the first question here.
Okay.
So one of the things that I did not realize would generate so many questions, and it's probably because we tried to do it. I showed a lot on YouTube, and I did a live demo, which mostly worked. And I laugh when
for
I
the
say
AI.
That. Yes. But a lot of people had questions about how I was getting data. When we did the scorecards, I don't know if you remember this, but we did the scorecards and I was showing folks how I was getting data out of our CRM and a few other data sources and pulling them into a scorecard, which is a spreadsheet, and then displaying that into what I call the critical number. which, listen, if you're listening to this, you obviously know I'm not a very smart person. The way I get the
Clearly.
critical number, yes, the way I get the critical number is no different than, and I'm just going to answer this as best as I can. And listen, if this is still not clear, then just reach out to me individually. I'm happy to answer, even take some time and do a call with you. I say that like as best as I can, realize that, I can't get to everyone, um, but it's no different than when you went to high school or college or whatever, where you have kind of this, you get this one grade at the end of the class and you get an A, B, C, and it's a number. And then there's components of how that number is calculated. That's exactly how we get our critical number at Triangle. And there's a lot of questions about that. And so if you can think of that, think of a weighted average, right? So if I'm looking at someone's position and I've got, in our company, we use position agreements and they've got, I don't know, say 5 critical results that they're responsible for, I will weight those critical results. So if I'm a salesperson, my sales might be, 50% of my grade, versus if I'm a CSR, my sales might only be 10% of my grade. And so we look at whatever the critical results are for each position, and then we weight those critical results based on what we're looking to get. And then at the end of the day, or at the end of the week or the month or whatever it is that we're grading for, we take the performance in that category and then we create this critical number. And so that is how we get it. Now, you don't need to geek out in order to do this, right? The concept itself, in my mind, is the most powerful piece of this, which is you could take a spreadsheet, you could decide what your critical numbers are. You could create this little formula where you come up with this weighted average, and you can manually put those in there. I'm not suggesting you do that, but you can. And for a few of our positions where we can't automate it, that's exactly what we do. But in positions where we can, like when you look at technicians, you're looking at our folks in the office, the really heavy hitting frontline positions where we've got a lot of data, we've automated that. And so we had a lot of questions about how do you get this critical number, which I just answered, and how are you getting data into these spreadsheets? Let me tell you the good and let me tell you the bad. The good is that it's not too difficult to do this with some CRMs. If you're working with a CRM that gives you an API access into your data, or in the case of WorkWave that has Report Writer, I'm sure there's other ones out there who give you access to your data. You can download a spreadsheet, upload into another one, and good to go. If you can automate that, fantastic. If you don't know how to do that, and I'm not joking when I say this, get on ChatGPT and have ChatGPT write you a program to do that, because it absolutely will. And if you don't know how to put all that together, still go to ChatGPT and ask it how to do that, and it will help you do that as well. And if you're still struggling after that, there's definitely some industry consultants that you can deal with or talk to. I'm sure Tom Gibbons, if you got something to work with, he can probably help you out. There's probably a few others that I don't know or not thinking of. But ultimately, the question that we got was, how did I get data into this spreadsheet? And I'm going to walk you through the way I do it. The way I do it is that Report Writer, I have Report Writer, schedule reports within Report Writer. It emails a kind of a common inbox. And then I have a program that I wrote that goes in, looks at that inbox, grabs the spreadsheet, and then pushes it to these other data sources that we have. We use Google BigQuery. So all it does is that's our data warehouse. And if you don't know what Google BigQuery is, ask ChatGPT. It'll walk you all the way through it. It'll tell you what it does. If you've not seen a trend here, I love ChatGPT. It has become part of who I am now.
But essentially, if so, you're like eons ahead, right? So, and you've got this recurring scorecard that you do. But let's say I have a spreadsheet and I want it to create charts using the data or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So when I go into ChatGPT or Gemini, I push that and I say, use this spreadsheet for the next series of questions, right? Then it digests the spreadsheet, and then you say, okay, show me, this spreadsheet might have all my sales by different service codes, and say, okay,
So-
create a chart that shows me.
Let me be clear on that though, because yes and no. ChatGPT and any kind of AI tool, in my mind, when you're uploading data and you're looking for analysis, That is very, very good for kind of ad hoc questions, right? It's not great for reporting at all. Like I would
Yeah, I
never
tried that.
use, yeah, I would never use it for
Yeah,
reporting because
yeah.
it's cumbersome. It's a lot of work involved, you know. So think of it in two different ways, right? So if I'm going to build a reporting system, which is exactly what we did, I put everything into a data warehouse. In our case, our data warehouse is Google BigQuery. There's multiple ones out there. I don't know if you remember, Dan, back in the day, but I tried another one called Click Data. I've done a few other ones, but we landed on Google BigQuery. I really, really like it. You don't have to use that. You could use whatever you'd like. But
Is that
that
like Snowflake? Isn't that a big one? That's
Snowflake's another one. BigQuery, depending on how much you use it and how much data you push into it, it's kind of pay for what you use. And I found it very, very reasonable compared to what we were getting quotes for. It is a fraction of the cost, and so I'd say it's pretty doggone cheap. But long story short, data insight versus data reporting are really two separate functions, and I would not recommend AI for data reporting. Now, having said all of that, we do use Google Sheets for data reporting. Now, it's not the best
so
tool.
stop right there. So data insights tell me, interpret what this spreadsheet tells
Correct.
me as opposed
Yes.
to create this spreadsheet.
Right. Or look through this data and tell me how many customers I lost in this month for this reason. You know what I mean? And when did they start? I mean, like you can get really very, very specific. Keep in mind, keep in mind, if you're using the free version of ChatGPT or even the paid version, that data, you really need to be careful with that, right? That's one thing I probably should have said in earlier episodes, which is unless you've got like the pro version or the upgraded one, and you can go on ChatGPT's website, unless you've got your own sanitized little sandbox, that data does go to OpenAI servers, and so you just need to make sure that whatever version you're running, I mean, in our case, we use pretty sanitized data, so I'm not too concerned about it. We're looking
Yeah.
at
So
numbers
so
on
if
the,
somebody knows how many quarterlies you have, who cares, right?
yeah, exactly. But if you're doing stuff where you're getting very, very sensitive data, um, which I think most of us in our industry, we're pretty firewalled from it anyway. I don't know of anyone who's, hosting credit card. Well, I take that back.
Well,
They
banking
should not.
information, but yeah,
Right.
stuff like that.
So anyway, point being, bringing it back, we are using a program that we wrote to push data to these dashboards that are housed inside of Google Sheets. There are definitely easier ways of doing that. If you spend any time with me at all, I like looking at data in very specific ways. It was the tool I could find that could get me what I wanted the fastest. And sometimes that's not always the best choice. But we were spinning and we were taking several months to do basic things. And so that's the tool I went with. There are things I love about it. There are things I hate about it. There's other products out there called like Google Looker. There's other products that you can use that is strictly a report, like Microsoft BI and those types of things that are specifically designed for reporting. But just realize this can turn
All
into a
right.
Pandora's box.
So you have a degree in computer programming. I don't know if anybody knows that, but so now you're a total geek, okay? I
Yeah, yeah.
could give a crap about anything you just said. I just want it to work. Are there guys or gals or consultants out there
Yes.
like Andrew Ladder? Could he, guy,
Yes, Andrew could do that, or he could find someone to do that. And
yeah.
listen, I'm not joking when I say this. You would be very shocked at how far you can get with ChatGPT. I mean, just amazingly far you can get. You don't need to be a programmer. You don't need to understand it. You can say, look, this is what I need to do, and this is what I want to do, and here's how I want to do it. Now, that takes a little bit longer. It is absolutely cheaper. But like I said, there's guys like Tom, and there are definitely folks out there who can help you. And listen, even if you don't want to use any of those folks, you can go to upwork.com, right? And I mean, I
Yep.
would be careful. You need to make sure that whoever you're dealing with there really knows what they're doing, because there's some crap up on upwork.com. There's folks out there that say they've done projects and you get into it and they need some help. We'll just leave it at that. But in any case, the question that we had come in was, how was I getting data to it? And the reality of it is that I wrote a program to do that manually, and it runs every hour, and it pushes that data. And for the most part, it works pretty well. But at the end of the day, it's not the best solution. I would say probably the best solution would be where we have access to our own data, but in our case, our CRM, we can't get direct access to it. We have to either use an API, we have to use Report Writer. So that's the real answer for that. for that question. Anything to add, Dan, before we move on to the next
That is enough for me
one?
on
Okay,
AI.
so the next question that we had is I'm reaching out for help in growing my pest business. I love the podcast. I need to grow my skill set in leading, hiring, etc. Where do I start? This is such a critical question. And I would say by reading this question, there's a lot of things I already know that I'm kind of reading between the lines, which is that's probably a smaller company. And I love the fact that you've said, "Hey, I need to grow my skill set in leading, hiring, et cetera. Where do I start?" I would say, and Dan, you may have a different idea on this. If you, and I'm not going to push my own book. There's several books out there that are way better than the books that I wrote, but I did write a book called Build. And I was very specific in the order that I put this in because this is exactly what that book is about. The book is about building your own company and kind of where do you start and what do you do. And one of the things that I did in that book, and I was very, very intentional about this, is that you need to fix your business model and your service and your company itself before you even think about getting into sales and marketing in a big way. I see folks who kind of half-ass their service. They kind of, and I pardon my language, you know what I mean? They kind of halfway do their office because they're so, they need to eat, right? They need money. They need to grow sales. And so they end up doing a lot of things halfway. And then they add sales and marketing to the mix, and then they can't execute. And then it turns into just this big ball of like just they're all over the place. They're stressed out. They can't get things done. They're constantly being,
Losing money.
yeah, they're losing money. And so for me, if to answer this question truthfully, where do I start? You don't need to read Build. I mean, you can if you want. I mean, I'm honored if you do. I'm honored if you don't. It's perfectly fine. I would definitely get EOS. I would get the book Traction. I would read it.
E-myth.
Yeah, E-Myth. I would basically look at. I mean, for me, if you start with the book Traction, the gold of that book in the very back, there's a recommended reading list, and almost every single book on that reading list I absolutely love. I've read them in the past. It was good to see them on there. And if you look at the books that he recommends, Gino Wickman is the one that wrote the book. A lot of the principles that you see in EOS came from those books. I mean, again, there's nothing new under the sun, but I would start with EOS and I would make sure that my company was nice and tight from a service perspective, from a customer experience perspective. Like I would make sure that my systems are pretty good, assuming that you can make your ends meet and that you can make the bills. And even if you can't, maybe you need to think, look, I'm going to take a year, I'm going to take two. I promise you, if you do that, you're going to go a lot faster than if you just try to like halfway it. When I mean halfway it, I mean like halfway your critical systems, not really document things and then just kind of figure it out as you go. I see this a lot, especially with door knockers turned pest control owners. And I'm not calling them specifically out,
Operation.
but I do see this a lot. They're salespeople and they want to get the sales on the board because they want to grow really, really fast. They don't put a ton of thought into the service side. And next thing you know, they're hurting for cash and they're trying to unload the business because they've got themselves into a position where the business has kind of either outgrown them or the problems have outgrown them and they just in a place that they can't fix it. And so, but also, I'm not just calling out, the door knocker guys. I mean, that's kind of a stereotypical example, but I see it in pest control guys too, right? They're all interested and in love with killing bugs and being the most perfect service provider. And meanwhile, their office is running rampant, right? They don't take the time to really think through this is how my office should run and invest in the critical systems like a checklist, right? And making sure things are happening. And so that's
It's also another interesting one is this building my business by undercutting my competition, right? By lowballing.
Yeah.
And if you think about how, like, I've had so many people say, well, I'm a one-man operation or a two-man operation. I should be able to do things cheaper than Orkin or Triangle or anything.
Right.
But at the end of the day, the gross margin is the gross margin. I don't care whether you're Rollins or whether you're, Joe one-man truck, right? That 50 to 55% gross margin is there. Now, if you choose to do your bookkeeping at night and be your own marketing guy and whatnot, yeah, that money's going to go to you. But you never want to lowball the other guy, right? So it just lowballing is you know, it's it's a quick race to the bottom. I experience it in my accounting firm. There's a competitor out there who's just, you know, they're throwing out prices that are half of ours. And we're like, okay, well, I have a bunch of CPAs that all make six digits. And, you know, how do I do that? And you can't, one of the things that, oh, geez, Walmart's doing it. Yeah, but it's a totally different strategy. And by the way, if you walk into a Walmart, there's some low prices, but then there are some items that are higher and whatnot. Lowballing is an absolute race to the bottom. And if you want to quickly figure out how to go out of business, that's what you do.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. And ultimately, what's going to happen is if you do that, as you grow, you're going to realize that you can't really make money on them when you go to scale, and you're going to have to cut them out. And listen, I am certainly an example of this. I have personal experience with this. I sold my commercial division probably, I don't know, 5 years into business, and the reason I sold it was because I realized I couldn't come up with my hourly rate with some of the stuff that I had sold. I'm not going to say who I sold it to. I will tell you that I was glad to get rid of it.
Mhm.
so,
But that's
so
the interesting thing, right? That hourly rate. And don't
mhm,
think that you can, we talk about that whole break even analysis and what it costs to operate for an hour. And it doesn't matter whether you're a one man or two man operation or a woman operation or whether you're 1,000. The margins are the same. They really
right,
are. Maybe
right.
Orkin can buy chemicals a little bit better, but chemicals are a commodity, right? Um, it just, the whole race to the bottom thing is really not such a good thing.
It is, and eventually it will put you out of business. You'll be working twice as long. You won't be making any money, and the problem is going to happen. When a recession comes or something happens where you really have to clamp down, and there's no meat on the bone. So, in
Yep.
any case, okay, I think that answers that question.
Here's
Um,
one that I have that came
okay,
in.
yeah.
What's the best piece of business advice you've ever received?
Mm. You know what? I This did not come on the podcast. It is one that to this day, I think is one of the best things I've ever done in my life. And I continue to do it, and I will continue to do it until the day I die, as long as I'm in business. And that is this: if there's something that you want to do, find someone who's doing it and replicate what they're doing. And that sounds so simple, but one of the best decisions I ever made, and at least in pest control, and I've told this story before in the podcast, was there was a United We Stand conference back when I very first started. I had been in business just for the summer. I was getting my butt kicked, and I became friends with Dave Boos. And he owned a company called Pest Masters in Richmond, had been in business for 30 some years. He was very successful. I was a young guy at the time. He was the old guy, and he really mentored me. He really showed me what was important. And I every month I would go up and I would take him ideas and marketing because I had a computer science background, and I was killing it on the web at the time. And so I didn't want to. I wasn't expecting him to just give me stuff. I definitely brought stuff of value back to him, but his mentorship, him kind of talking me through, like, because I'd be like, I want to do this, this, and this. And he'd be like, okay, well, think about this. And just his insights. Number one, he really helped me believe that I could do it. Number two, um, his wisdom early on really shaped how I built my business. And I got the benefit of, in his case, 30 some years of experience. And I still made mistakes, and I still did things that probably, I would do over again if I could. Um, but that has been by far, when I think about the best piece of advice I've ever had, is find someone who's doing it and really get to know that person and pick their brain, because you're not going to pick it all up in the book. You're not.
No.
You're not going to pick it all up in a conference. You're not. I mean, it's just not. And it really takes that level of detail. It takes that level of commitment. And I would also say that if you decide to do that, make sure that if you're going to go to someone and you want them to help you, don't just sit there with your hand out. I don't think a lot of folks in our industry are that way, but I have seen people who take this advice and they go completely the opposite direction. I'm not going to name names, but what drives me crazy is I'm happy to meet with folks, happy to talk with folks, but don't waste my time. Wasting my time is that you come talk to me, you don't have an agenda, we talk about stuff, you don't execute, and then you come back a month later or 2 months later, and I
Doesn't
need
work.
this, I need to know this, this, and this. And I'm like, well, what did you do the other? And they're like, no. And I'm like, okay, well, you're not committed here. And so let's just stop pretending like you're wanting to do stuff when you really don't. So that would be mine. How about yours?
Best piece of advice that I ever got, and
Yeah.
it was from an industry mentor as well, a guy named Ed Bradbury. He owned Viking Termite and Pest Control. I was his CFO. And he said this. He said, 50% of marriages end in divorce, and most of those divorces are over money. You make sure that you make enough money that you never fight with your spouse about money.
That is good
And
advice.
I will tell you that 33 years later, I have an amazing marriage, an amazing life, and that piece of advice is sound, and you
Uh-huh.
get that by having operating a profitable business, and
Yes.
no lowballing, making sure that your
Mhm.
operation is squeaky clean. But that's the best piece of it advice that I've ever gotten.
Yeah. Well, that I would say that's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's a good one. That's a good
So,
one. That's a good one.
so how about this one? One thing that you knew when you first start, or one thing that you wish you knew when you first started that you know now.
Hmm. One thing I wished I knew when I started that I know now. Um, I think, you know, man, that could go in so many different directions. Um, I think probably the thing I wished I would have known back then that I know now is the power of time. When you I've always been a person who is in a hurry. I've always been a person that's never fast enough. I want to get it done yesterday. Um, and so I used to be this person who I would go on I would go on the crash diet, right? I would go on we're going to do low carb, and it would be all in full, just everything I got, super, super intense. And then after a week, a month, couple months, 3 months, it would just kind of peter out. And so I spent a lot of time kind of bouncing from strategy to strategy, and it never really worked on the operating system, right? And so now in my own life, what I've learned is I just do a little bit every day. Like I'm not joking when I tell you. And Dan, you've seen this because you've been in peer groups where I've introduced this, right? I have this little spreadsheet I call Win the Day, and I spend a little bit of time in every area of my life, and it's just amazing. It's not that much time, 15, 20 minutes a day, and I'll do something little. I make a little bit of progress in each area, and time has a way of making that little bitty 15 minutes, 20 minutes every single day. That consistency turns into massive results later on. And just knowing that that really works, knowing that it's really all it takes, and knowing that, if you do that enough, time absolutely will work its magic. I know that now. I know that now in my 40s. I wished I'd had known that in my 20s, because I feel like had I known that, I would have spent a lot more time with my family. I would have spent a lot more time. I would have wasted a lot less money. I know that for certain, because there was definitely times I made big gambles on things that I probably should not have done. And by the way, I've done that on things that did pay off. But I'm just simply making the point that this whole thing of massive, massive effort without consistency, it just it just doesn't work. And so I think that's probably the biggest thing I've learned. What about you?
The one thing that I wish that I knew then that I do know now is where business valuations were going to
Yeah. Well, we all would love to have the stock market card, 20 years ahead of the time. Yeah, of course. Yeah, because if that's the case, I don't think Mr. Dan Gordon, I think he'd still own a pest control company. I think that's
Probably.
exactly what
Or
he's
I
saying.
would have exited maybe
Yeah.
yesterday.
Yeah, 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 exactly, exactly. No, you know what? Obviously, we all would love to have that, but no, I mean, and by the way, since when is you getting so freaking philosophical? I mean, I've never known Dan to have these philosophical questions, so it's kind of interesting to hear. You
just
asked me this.
reading the mailbag. That's
Yeah,
it.
reading the mailbag. So okay, so you can't take credit for it. You just have to
Just reading the
repeat it. But yeah,
mailbag.
no, I mean, listen, again, it's if you ever come to our peer groups and I'm happy to share, the 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 win the day thing. But and again, and some people make fun of it, but a lot of folks, man, I get done. I've had folks do it and lose a lot of weight. I've had folks do it, and again, it's just one of those principles that I don't know. I
No,
think
but I
just
think that the whole just the parallel with the diet versus life, right? Because
yeah,
yeah, I used to wrestle when I was in high school. I wrestled. I could lose 10 pounds in 3 days if I had to.
right,
But
right.
that to keep it off and whatnot, that's a lifestyle change. And so
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Get into
agree.
marathon training, not sprint training. That's for sure. When it comes to
Yep,
life. So,
yep, yep.
okay. Do you have any more like philosophical? I mean, I remember there was a few more in here that were pretty simple that I can knock out, but if you got more, I will keep going here. So what else you
Nothing
got?
philosophical. I don't know. Well, if you want to explain that, what did you call that? The a little bit each day or
Oh, the win the day, the
the
win the
win
day.
the
Yeah.
day?
I will
Yeah.
talk about that briefly. And then I'm going to go into a few more questions, which is
Yeah.
it's nothing more than my own personal accountability system where I legitimately, one of the books that had a big impact on me, probably about, I'd say 8 years ago, is a book called Triggers. And in that book, the guy's name's Harvey Voglantz or something. I can't remember the author. I think that's his name. Um, but he
He's
says,
an industry guy, Harvey Goldglance. Is that
yeah, I don't, yeah, he is, but he said
the marketing?
one of the most difficult things is human change, right? Like behavioral change. And he said he's this big consultant. He gets paid millions of dollars, and
That's not
he
Harvey Goldglance.
no, no, no. It's again, you have to go and look him up. I have to go and while we're here, I'll look him
Okay.
up. Maybe you can look him up while I'm yapping my yapper here. But the book's called Triggers, and he gets paid literally millions of dollars to go in and work with these really high powered um, executives, and he said, I just work on one behavior at a time. And this was kind of an idea where he said that he does his personally, but he has obviously a lot more money than most, and he has an assistant who holds him accountable. Then he would be like, did I do this today? And did I do this today? And did I do this today? And it was basically how he builds habits. And so, um, Donnie, I rednecked it out. I put it into a spreadsheet. I don't have someone calling me, but it's essentially just this little thing at the end of the day where I review like, okay, did I work out today? And did I write my journal today? And did I spend 30 minutes on triangle or, did I spend 10 minutes on this? And I don't, the key is not to load it up. I mean, just maybe like 4 or 5 critical things, 10 if you're like Dan and uber productive, but,
Marshall Goldsmith. That's the guy.
Marshall, that's who it is. Marshall. I mean, it sounds like him anyway. Yeah. So Marshall Goldsmith is the guy who wrote it. And so I took that idea and I took the idea and then I made it into a spreadsheet. And so now, what
That
that's turned
figures.
into, yeah, is it's a thing that I do and it's worked out well. I mean, it's allowed me to, I'm big on making progress and the issue I have is I get into a project and then the world stops, right? And it has my complete focus. Meanwhile, there's other pieces of my life that's kind of fallen to the wayside. And so, but if I can say, hey, I spent 30 minutes on this or I spent an hour on this, then I can call it a win and I can move on and worry about these other pieces of my life that tend to get neglected, like my health or my eating or whatever. Whereas in the past, I would just be like making excuses. And so, okay, now let's get into a couple more things here. This is a question. It says, quote, in episode 78, you mentioned that you had your team read Super Service and had a test for them. Is there an episode where you can describe the steps you take to implement that? And are they expected to read it on their own time? Okay, so first of all, I'm going to say I'm not an attorney. I'm certainly not Gene C. Wright. So take anything I say, and this is just me personally. No, I do not have anyone do anything on their own time. I'm too afraid of getting sued or said that I made people do things that they shouldn't do on their own time. So I don't do that. So I do pay them. The second thing is, yes, there is a test. It's a chapter by chapter test. And so the idea is that, you depending on how fast you want to do this training, we do it as part of onboarding. And so they'll read a chapter, they'll take a test on that chapter. And I'm not trying to create PhDs, right? I'm trying to create working knowledge. Like, how do you handle a customer that's upset? How do you smile? Like, how do you do things that you're on the phone? And so we have graduated. Um, we now have an LMS. We use Paychex as our an LMS, by the way, is a learning management system, which basically means it's somewhere that you can put exams in and track people's training and get all highfalutin. But you don't need to do it that big. Back in the old days, we just had little paper tests, and they would take it, and then we graduated to Google Forms, and then after that, then we came up to. I used to have a software called Forgely that I sold, and of course, that all went in when I got out of software. But long story short, we used to use Google Forms. Now we use Paychex, and it scales to the entire company. But ultimately, that's how we're doing it. And I would say this: don't get caught up in the mechanics of doing training. Just do it. The reality of it is that all you're trying to do is you're trying to create awareness, and you're trying to keep people fresh on like trying to get better and how to deliver really, really good service. And so I am less concerned about doing it right. And I'm a lot more concerned with just doing it. And that's not a Nike commercial. That's just the
So
reality.
let me ask you about the LMS, the learning management system. There's so many of them out there,
Yeah.
and you have decided to go with your payroll slash
Yeah.
HR system, probably because it all meshes well with that. But did you look at some of the
We
other
did. And
ones?
there are
And
ones out
what?
there that are 10 times better. Yep.
Oh, really? So
Yeah.
what made you choose Paychecks? Or I get
Integration.
why you, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just more about like, you know, it's kind of like your CRM, right? Everyone complains their CRM doesn't do this, their CRM doesn't do that. 9 times out of 10, it actually does do that. You just don't know how to use the software. And so
Hmm.
I am of the mindset now, less is more. And so I'd much rather like use the software that we have and learn it as best as we can. And even though it may not have something that, some little report that I want to see, or it may not work exactly as smooth as some other one, unless it's some strategic like business need, we're just going to deal with it because I don't want to. I've been in the world where we had 20 different softwares and we were paying for all of them. And then someone moves or changes or whatever, and you got to deal with that. And there's this whole idea of support. And so, no, we went with Paychex because we're already using it for payroll. We're already pretty well into that software. And I just didn't want to like implement another software. I didn't want to, we pay for it, of course. But and it's not as integrated as you might think. You would think that everything just rolls right through, and it kind of does. But I see the vision, right? I see the platform, and eventually, it's going to be completely integrated. And we did the same thing with time and attendance, right? I mean, we use Paycheck solutions for that. By the way, I'm not advocating any of that. There's pieces of it I hate, but that's what we're doing.
Okay. No,
Yeah,
that's good information, right? Because
yeah,
the fewer softwares you have in your tech stack, the easier it is to navigate everything.
yeah. The critical thing is like, is there a business? Because back in the day, I had a bit of a chip on my shoulder, and if there was one little thing I really, really want, I'd be willing to just rip it all out, and this is what we're doing. And these days, I'm just like, it's not worth that. It's just not worth it. If I've got something that's going to work and it's good, then that's what we do. So,
What is it?
okay.
Perfection is the enemy of me.
Well, at the end of the day, does it work and does it get the job done? And my view on it is that oftentimes, if you can get the right driver or the right person that understands it and will learn the software all the way, then you can usually get what you want. It may not be exactly the way you want it, but it'll be far enough along that it's you don't need to run yet another difference. The complexity piece is the part that I'm trying to get out, and so that's the part that you got to fight. Okay, I got time for one more question. Are you good for one more, Dan?
Yep, I got the question right here.
Okay, go. Do it.
Riding shotgun in your airplane, who is the best co-pilot you've ever had?
That would not be Dan Gordon, by the way.
What? Come on.
Oh my gosh.
I'm
I don't know
I'm
if you're leading
totally
up to this stuff.
compliant with the pre-
Oh,
the
you are very
checklist.
compliant. You're very compliant. Okay, so here's a quick story, and this is pretty freaking hilarious. And I had no awareness of it until the person that was sitting co-pilot made a point after we landed, which was we were flying an unnamed business associate. I'm flying. This unnamed business associate is sitting in the co-pilot seat, and Dan is in the back. And Dan, is this the first time you'd been? This is the first time you'd been on the plane with me, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're flying, and I don't even remember where we were going. We're going to Texas, or I don't know where we're going.
Remember.
Who knows? I don't know. We're going somewhere. It's a pretty long flight. Maybe it was Charleston. I don't know. Anyway, so we're flying. Dan's back there having a great old time and asking boatloads of questions. And I'm just answering them, not thinking much of it. It's a beautiful day. We're flying, blah, blah, blah. We land. So we land. And this unnamed business associate's like, Dan, dude, what is going on with you? He's like, what are you talking about? And he had started taking notes of how many times Dan was asking questions about how we were going to die.
Now, wait, we got to frame this, because before we take off, Donnie goes through his checklist and he said, now, if anything happens, we meet 150 yards behind the tail of the plane. To me, that means that the plane's going to crash, and that if we have if we're alive, we all meet behind the plane.
That's correct.
So I just wanted to understand, where, how that was going to work.
Anyway,
that's where it started.
But my point here is that the questions, there were so many of them of how we could die. This person started to log them. And that's what made it so funny. And then I started thinking through, and I'm like, yeah, actually, every question he asked was how we were going to die. So that was the entire conversation. So yes. All right. So
I'm just limiting my downside. That's all.
Okay, I'm going to do this last one we're going to finish out, which is the last one we got here is in light of the CloudStrike glitch, which has been a while back. But, everyone remembers the CloudStrike, which took down airliners and, took down just a ton of folks. And it says auto dealership outage earlier this year. What are your thoughts on how to run your business if systems go down? So here's what I will tell you. So first of all, is it possible that could happen? Well, if it can happen to the airlines, of course it can happen to us. If it can happen to, just these massive companies that have all this IT infrastructure, of course it can happen to us. I can remember multiple, especially early on, and I'm not going to name software providers here, but where they got hit and they were out for a day or two. What I'll tell you is this, at least for us, we have backups. All the software that we do run in the cloud. We run on Google. I'm sure if you're running Microsoft or Google now, most of that stuff's in the cloud. I'm not telling you it is impossible, because again, it happened to the airliners. But what I will say is that I just would not. That's a very slippery slope, man. You could go to hundreds of thousands of dollars down this road. And the question you got to ask yourself is this really worth it? The likelihood you're going to have an outage is pretty high. The likelihood you're going to have an outage for longer than a week is, I would say, very low. And that would be with any provider that I can think of that's in our industry now. And so, if that's the case, I don't know. Think about a hurricane, right? Or think about some sort of big nature event where you're down for a week. It's not ideal, but it's not fatal. And so what Donnie Ray's plan is that, if we took something like that, we would do the best we could with paper and we would backfill as necessary. But I also wouldn't bat an eye at, taking 3, 4, 5 days out where we're not going to do work because, we can't and then pick it back up once it happens. Because the reality of it is that, I don't know, sometimes people lose their mind over software stuff, whereas we don't bat an eye about the weather. And the reality of it is that both of them are out of our control in most cases, right? Now, if your software is going down every other month, well, then you probably need to get another software provider. But it's just so uncommon. And even if it is, the likelihood that it's going to last longer than 3 or 4 days, I'd say. I'm not saying it's impossible, just highly unlikely. You got anything to add to that, Dan?
Nope. I think you're absolutely right on that one.
All righty. All right. So the standard stuff here, just a reminder, all the resources and topics we talked about today are available on the podcast website. Just take a look at pmpindustryinsider.com. Take a look under show notes. Also, if you're going to be out in Denver, I think this episode's going to air before Pest World. At least I hope it does now that I'm announcing it here at the end. Love to see you. If you see me around, please stop me. If I don't recognize you, shake my hand. Same thing for Dan. We love talking to our listeners. But of course, like I always say, if you have complaints, pass those on to Dan. If you've got nothing but compliments, then I'll talk to you as long as you can talk. And so with that, we're going to sign off. We'll see y'all next time. Take care.
Take care.
Bye now.